Hello and welcome. Japan and the UK are in recession. Japan has in fact slipped behind Germany. It's now the world's fourth largest economy. Germany is also heading towards a recession, and India is now a beacon of hope for investors. India could in fact eclipse both Japan and Germany in terms of GDP by 2027. India is currently the world's fifth largest economy. It's the world's fastest growing large economy. And growth is projected to reach 6.2% this year. The Indian economy today is firing on all cylinders. And that's also the overall theme of our What India Thinks Today Global Summit. India poised for the next big leap.
Hi Sandeep, thank you very much for that. India poised for the next big leap, and the world is looking at India as a shining example to discuss India's growth story and what is in store as far as a world economic outlook towards India and India's growth is concerned. Let me quickly get on board. Rakesh Khar joining us here on the show. Also with me is R. Sridharan. Gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time out, and thank you for being a part of this discussion where we're hoping to understand India's growth trajectory, but more so as TV9 prepares for that mega global summit. I want to come to you, Rakesh, first. Why is the world looking at India when it comes to growth? What has India got to offer?
There's such a tailwind surrounding India that it's very difficult to locate a negative when one talks about the India story today. For me, I have categorized this as a 4 I story, followed by 1 D and 1 F. I'll just explain quickly so that we decode the India growth story. Remember the Incredible India campaign that we launched in regard to tourism? I would call it now the Incredible Bullish India story. That's how the world is looking at it. It's truly incredible. Coming to the 4 I's, it's infrastructure, investment, inclusion, and finally, it is indigenization. That's Make in India. Building Indian companies, giving them the strength to stand on their own feet, not only domestically but in the global arena. We haven't yet reached there, but the aspiration is quite right. These are 4 I's, which are the 4 key pillars of India growth story. That's how the world is looking at. In this, these 4, to my mind, inclusion is the biggest takeaway for the world at large. Now I come to the big D, which is digitization. That's again a global template. In a very short span of time, India has fast-tracked its growth journey using digital as the architecture, as the pivot, as the lever. And then 1F, which is the federal play. See, we have a case today in India where we have a very strong center led by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who is making his bid for the 3rd time and who is going to address the, What India Thinks Global Summit as the summit keynote. And we have very strong states. Even the weaker states have an aspiration today to become the leader. So the laggard to leader story, for instance in Uttar Pradesh, is such a remarkable story. Bihar is also making its momentous changes. We have challenges there, but every state is competing and collaborating and converging on this big story called India poised for the next big leap.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and in fact, I want to add one more alphabet to that.
Yeah, please.
C. That's the big C, the I plus C, the India plus 1, the China plus 1. And 3, we are looking at the figures coming out of China.
Right.
80% contraction in FDI. It's the lowest in over 3 decades.
That's right.
Is that a big opportunity for India to fit
Absolutely,
in the China
absolutely.
plus 1 strategy?
Absolutely, without any doubt, Sandeep. Just to add a couple of things to what Rakesh was saying, if you look at the big picture, there's also a decadal momentum that's behind India. And there's the other half of the story is basically geopolitical movement. Because if the world is looking at India because they have run out of maybe options in other parts, which were until recently an option for them, and now suddenly India is looking better in comparison to those options, right? So that's exactly what's happening. You talked about China, FDI dropping to a 30-year low, unprecedented real estate crisis, which has been building up over decades, but it's finally come to a head. Aging population, productivity drop. So the best of forecasts, whether it's IMF or China's own internal, independent economists, they are looking at least 5 to 10 years of a slowdown ahead of China. Now, there is no other large market which can take up that space. If you look at India, that's the only market which can fill China's big shoes. So China has been a modern miracle, no doubt about it. But I think the formula in which they built and grew at a breakneck pace over the last, let's say, 3 decades, that's now probably come to a full circle now. So I think that's run out of steam. India, on the other hand, we have never excessively built or, we have always been fiscally prudent as a country. We have not overbuilt infrastructure. Right. In fact, there's a huge scope for infrastructure growth even now, like Rakesh was mentioning. One of the I's that he mentioned was, infrastructure. Unlike China, we have another D, which Rakesh, also wanted to mention, but this is a demographic dividend. We have a huge pool of young talent, a labor force which is available. So you're not going to run out of any kind of productivity challenge. So which is why the world is looking at India now as a manufacturing base as well. I think the more important issue, Sandeep, which we tend to underplay is also, that India is not seen as an aggressive, hegemonistic country. Like, unfortunately, China has built itself up, at least under Mr. Xi Jinping. So I think there is a greater comfort for the world to deal with a democratic country where the systems are strong, the judiciary is robust, the political systems are robust, and there's transparency in everything. So I think these large factors, I mean, there are multiple factors, but those have come together to mean that this is India's moment. And this is what India is going to benefit from, not just for the next 5 years, but I think going forward 15, 20 years, perhaps. So this is a tailwind which Rakesh was mentioning, which is very clearly behind India right now.
And now that we've established why world is looking at India, let's also understand historically, in the past couple of years, Sandeep, and you and I were discussing this, the world is facing a headwind when it comes to various wars, disruption in supply chains, and resultantly the shockwaves that have hit badly some of the Western economies, with Japan, Germany, UK almost on brink of recession or in recession at this point in time. And in all of this, you have India standing out.
Right, absolutely. You have India that's bulletproof. In fact, that's the headline that we gave to one of our documentaries. We could take a quick look at that. Bulletproof India. Why India is actually standing ahead of the pack. What are the factors that power India ahead of the rest of the countries that are in deep recession today? Let's watch.
These continuous waves of shocks have really disrupted the supply side of the economy, and that has had inflationary effects across the world, which affects all of us.
Very critically, we kept doing supply side reform.
India deserves to be called a bright spot on this otherwise darker horizon.
India leading the pack of recession-proof global economies. And Shweta, this point that you made, the fact that we've made all the right decisions, I would think, in the last couple of years, especially after the pandemic. I think we put our heads down, took all the right steps. We didn't overspend, we didn't overbuild. We've made all the right investments, especially in infrastructure. Our UPI, that's a big game changer. 11 billion transactions a month. It's not monetized yet, but I think it's something that's never been done in the history of the world. The fact that we have a demographic dividend, that's another thing that's working in our favor. And that demographic dividend, as Sri mentioned, that's going to last well into the middle of this century. China is going to be looking at something like a population of with a median age of 50, when India is going to be just 38, the world's largest young population. I think the future is really bright, and that's one of the reasons why you have this incredible lineup of leaders lining up behind India. This puppy and Jappi would not work if it were not for the economy, stupid.
Absolutely.
It's
the
economy.
The fundamentals of the
Yes.
economies. And let's spend a minute or two to discuss India's macro picture, because that is where we'll get a better picture of how and where India is headed. Let's talk about GDP for that matter. 6.3%, I believe, Sandeep, is an underestimation of what India will grow at. It will grow anywhere to the tune of 7 to 7.3%. That is the estimate coming in. These are some of the late estimates. Advanced estimates suggest that there could be an upward revision as well. Now, GDP set aside, India has a dream. It wants to be the third biggest economy, $7 trillion economy, trillion dollar economy by the turn of the decade. What will, according to you, Rakesh, first to you, be the challenges that India is faced with? We understand inflation is also under control. Headline inflation could perhaps play a spoil sport. We have a very prudent fiscal glide path, 5.8% this year, 5.1% next year. What are the challenges that you are foreseeing?
Before I come to challenges, Shweta, I think we were discussing demography. I have a certain play on that. It's a very nice, interesting perspective when demography plays with democracy. That's the dividend India has.
Yeah, the 2 Ds.
The 2 Ds, you know,
Right,
and
absolutely.
led by digitization. So
Right.
that becomes the 3 Ds.
Yes.
I like your acronyms.
Yeah, so coming to be learning from Mr. Modi, actually the acronym business was started by Venkaiah Naidu when he was
Right.
you know, the urban development minister, and of course he became the vice president. He never left his favorite pastime of creating these acronyms, which at times were extremely popular. You know, the good thing about the India story and the leadership that it is driving right from state to center is that we are cognizant of our challenges.
Yes.
So the fact that we have stayed away or steered away from something called UBIC, where you essentially transfer cash in times of emergency like COVID.
Yes.
There was immense pressure on Mr. Modi and some of the states as well, from ruling opposition and from global intellectuals.
From reputed economists.
Yeah, let's leave them nameless for a while, because that argument has shown
Yes.
the truth of the matter is that we took the right decision by being fiscally prudent. We steered the course and we could achieve the growth. The other most important point here is that the government led from the front. See, the private sector investment is still a challenge. I still call it a laggard because
Yes.
they're not truly kicking in despite exhortations from the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister. You can't take them by the collar, but then you can nudge them. They're still not actually playing the game they're supposed to give. There are issues they have, which I'll come separately, but the fact of the matter is that investment for a change was led by the government. It set the tone. Globally, GDP comprises 70 to 75% by private sector. In India, we have reversed the paradigm. Imagine once private sector investment kicks in the same proportion or more than the government investment, look at the momentous impact it will have on the economy.
Absolutely.
Challenges are many. I think, unemployment is a challenge. A lot of states, as I mentioned, are still really to do a catching up. You can't have a family where you have some members, who are extremely weak and poor, are unable to run with the sibling. That has its own challenges. This north-south divide, which unfortunately is being used for political purposes, is a challenge on ground economically also. And in that sense, addressing those concerns, where the Prime Minister talks about Team India, where states are also collaborating. India had the largest representation in Davos, for instance, this time in January, where 5 state governments went there. So that shows that everybody wants to
Spirit
grow.
of cooperative federalism.
Yeah,
Competitive
they compete.
federalism.
And competitive federalism.
We have seen with Foxconn, Karnataka is also chasing them, Tamil Nadu
Yes.
is also chasing them. So that's very interesting and very good. But unemployment, so this demographic can turn, a liability if we don't truly address them the way they are. We have to, rise to a situation where their true potential is truly leveraged. We are yet not there.
Right.
I mean, demography and democracy is fine. The elections are there. First-time voters will cast their vote. The number is swelling up. Women are getting in there in that first-time voter as well. That equality is there. But if you don't have jobs for them, that is going to create, unrest of all kinds, social, political, and economic.
Exactly. In fact, Mr. Kara, I would like to add a 4th D to that, which is that demography is not destiny, as they say. So it's not enough to just have a young population if you don't have jobs, if you're not skilling them, if they don't have high-quality jobs.
It could be counterproductive, as I said.
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
could rebound. There could be social unrest. There could be anarchy. I mean, Afghanistan today is one of the youngest countries in the world. But look at where they are today.
To what use?
What use is that?
Absolutely.
They're probably, they're terrorists and they're gun runners and drug traffickers. So is that the kind of thing that we are looking at if, if unemployment is not tackled, if skilling is not tackled? I mean, that is a very, very big area of concern.
Absolutely, Sandeep. But I think that's also the opportunity.
Yes.
So what the world is really looking at is, okay, there are certain pockets where there's still investment required, where there are significant improvements required. So that from an investment point of view is actually an opportunity for someone.
Yes.
So even this whole aspect of skilling workers, it's an opportunity for someone who's in the space of skilling people, right? And industry, of course, will absorb the workforce that comes out of these training institutes and colleges. But what we have to understand finally is that we don't live in isolation. So our growth, our performance will be relative to the rest of the world.
Yes.
So tomorrow, let's say for whatever reason, Shweta talked about the wars that are going on. For whatever reason, let's say there's a flare up, which is quite likely. So, things could at any time flare up into something which is global.
Right.
In that scenario, how protected is India? India is relatively protected.
Yes.
But is it absolutely protected from anything that happens around the world? Absolutely not. Right? So I think it's safe to say that that's what the world is also looking at. I mean, they obviously are aware of the challenges that we face, the disruptions that could happen to the supply chain, inflation going up, and all those parts. But they're looking at markets which are relatively insulated.
Right.
I think that is the India's big attraction.
Absolutely.
No one is saying that, nothing will go wrong in India.
Absolutely.
But
Right.
am I relatively safe being here compared to another country? I think that's the decision that fund managers and the people who are putting their money where their mouth is, that's the decision they're making.
Let's watch this excerpt from our story, News9 Plus story that we did recently. It's called Bullish on India. Let's watch.
Some of the policies that Prime Minister Modi's brought in is attracting investors to India.
Our growth story has been bought by all investors.
What would run in India's favor is this is a country which for 20, 30 years, the economy and the stock market have delivered performance which has not been matched by any other EM.
It's important to recognize the steps that we have made, and also recognize that these policy steps will bring results.
India's largest FMCG company, largest private investment bank and largest automaker are all foreign owned. Which other country in the world would let that happen? That clearly tells you why the world is betting on India, Shweta.
Absolutely. And since we are on why the world is betting on India and India's growth trajectory, when we talk about GDP, and since we're talking about that GDP formula, an important aspect of that is also consumption. Now, high frequency indicators, including your real estate sales to automobile sales, will tell you that India is consuming at a rate like never before. However, majority of this consumption is driven by urban consumption as opposed to rural consumption, which is again a point of concern, Shri. At this point, do you see consumption story also kicking in rural India, and do you think that is a challenge the government will have to mitigate going forward?
It's definitely a challenge, Shweta, because we talked about unemployment earlier. Well, it's a reality that we have not been able to create as many jobs as we could have given the economic growth that we're experiencing, but that may be also a reflection of the nature of economy itself. I think if we say that 66% of our employment is still dependent on agriculture, I think that's and look at the contribution of agriculture to GDP.
Absolutely, 20%.
So I think
and 60% of India lives in the villages.
Correct. So we need that shift to happen. We need to reduce the dependence on agriculture. We need to move these people into other maybe services sector or manufacturing. So that's a long haul process that needs to happen. So when that happens, obviously we'll see that the demand from rural side also goes up. But I think these are all challenges that we need to deal with as an economy. It's not something that's going to go away overnight. These are all structural issues that we need to address. And I think those will be addressed. But there's no magic wand that either Prime Minister Modi or Nirmala Sitharaman or anyone has that they can wave and these things just disappear.
And just before we went into break, we were also discussing India's resilience when it comes to some of the global shock waves. And we've seen India's export-import story, Rakesh, somehow emerging as again a beacon of light there, because exports have been on the rise while imports have been subdued to a little bit. The Red Sea crisis has also played its part there, but overall India's export story continues to look brighter. But India now needs to focus, as many would say, on exports of services as opposed to exports of goods, which is where we're not doing too well at the moment. But I think that is again an area of concern, an area of interest where India has stood out in the past couple of years.
Absolutely. My own view is that post-liberalization in 1991, we haven't truly reimagined our export basket. It's very traditional, it's very, inward-looking. It is not aligned yet with the larger changes in the global market, which obviously are always in a very imponderable kind of a situation because global markets have their own challenges. Another war or another strike somewhere changes the dynamics. But we have to reimagine our export basket. And the numbers are looking good in a relative term. We really have to scale up. And both, it's not either or. Goods and services both have to really kick in. And Sandeep is a defense expert. He knows that we have started bringing in some new elements or new buckets. So defense exports, we are one of the largest importers in the defense area, but we have started on a modest scale and we have started exporting defense. We created a new example, for instance, looking at actually stealing an opportunity in the Ukraine war situation by creating a new relationship with Russia, an economic reset I would call it, and it's an economic reset for the global order as well, because we reimagined the oil deal, and that in turn has created a new equilibrium, and India has become closer to Russia. We had some challenges there, and what we're doing is that with that import, which is cost efficient to India, we have also started refining that and exporting that. So US is upset with that, many others are upset. So we are slowly seeing opportunities in putting in some innovation in export basket. We'll have to do much more of that. For instance, our entire agri-export bucket is truly, in an extremely, ad hoc kind of a state. We have, inflation is a political problem. If we have pulses, prices rising or onion prices rising, we stop exports, we bring in more imports. We don't look at economics that time, we look at politics. So if we continue to look at exports of agri-processed foods in that manner, then we have a problem. We need to be consistent with our agri-export policy. That's one area we have huge potential, but then we'll have to divorce that from the political challenge of, we lost, BJP lost the election in Delhi purely on onion prices. So, we have to move beyond and, move on and not truly, worry about losing an election here and there.
And there's very little that the government can anyway do by the way of changes in monetary policy. It can only alter with the fiscal, and it is doing so. It's done so by procuring tur dal, by procuring vegetables. At the peak of, improbable climatic conditions last year, when tomato prices were at an all-time high, we could buy them from mandis at a much discounted rate.
This is one reform that hasn't happened despite the decadal movement that Srini was referring to. And I really look forward to this reform.
Right. And since we are, Sandeep, on farm and agriculture, I think we must address the elephant in the room, and that is with the ongoing farms protest. Now, you have, Rakesh, on record been consistently against freebies. You've been against dole-outs, which mean nothing when there is no return coming our way as a country. With respect to what farmers are demanding, it's going to be an economic issue as much as a political issue. Where do we stand at the moment? Can we give in to what farmers are demanding, which is a legal guarantee on MSP? The hurt that it will cause to the Indian economy and to India's fiscal math, will we be able to reach that fiscal deficit path if we were to give way to a legal guarantee on MSP for 23 crops on the basis of Swaminathan's formula?
Shweta, I think we need to educate ourselves and educate our viewers. First and foremost, farmer is not one homogeneous entity. And this farmer is essentially from Punjab and parts of Haryana and then parts of UP. In that sense, this is a very small section of the farmers who are represented. And the entire farm output in India, only 28% is this category, wheat and paddy. Rest 72% is growing at about 10 to 12%, milk, poultry. All of them are fighting in a big way, fisheries. So we don't even talk about that. If we start asking for MSP, there is endless number of commodities in India who will start asking for it. And there are two different tracks. This track, the 78% or 72% is firing on its own because it's market aligned. I mean, you go every day, Mother Dairy or Amul raises the prices of the and we consume it because it is
essential.
There is a market at play. The more and more we delay ourselves from bringing in the market mechanics in our farm structure, the farm economy is going to lag, even if some farmers get rich.
So there's a moral hazard to the whole argument which at least some of these farmers are putting forward, which is they're not looking at livelihood protection but livelihood guarantee, right? I don't think there's any profession anywhere in the world which is like guaranteed, right? Then the most important thing is you cannot distort the economics of a market, right? If you create perverse incentives, which is what they're asking for in some sense, you're distorting the market completely. The fundamentals of supply demand, the fair, transparent way in which every market needs to work, that goes for a complete toss.
Absolutely.
And then incentivizing people to produce a certain item which again will eventually crash because there's an overproduction of that, because we've seen this happen ad nauseum in the history of agriculture. That government incentivizes and there's an overproduction and the price crashes, so a government ends up picking up the tab and that's a loss to the public exchequer in some sense.
And a law to guarantee MSP, that would kill the agricultural
Absolutely.
sector. I mean, buyers would shy away from the market.
I'm a firm believer in reforms, which are led by market. So, this word guarantee came in the UP era.
Yes.
This, Mahatma Gandhi National Employment Guarantee Scheme.
Right.
Guarantee is something which is, to my mind, anti-reform.
Yes.
The moment you guarantee something, it kills the inherent spirit of resilient India to stand on its own feet.
Right.
We have had policies across on poverty, but I believe they were pro-poverty, not pro-poor.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting.
Pro-poverty and pro-poor. But the other important thing that we haven't really touched upon, Shweta, is the political stability that this government has kind of brought in. And you had the Prime Minister not so long ago, just a few days back, in fact, saying that he had been invited by all the other heads of government all through the year, which means that the foreign governments knew that he was coming back to power. So that's, I think, one of the most important guarantees of continuation of policies.
Absolutely.
The fact that, you have political stability, 10 years, another 5 years.
And that's very clearly by design. I think the Prime Minister Modi has also spoken on this. He said, I am committed to my policies, and he's got a long-term vision for the country, right? So you will not see any ad hocism in terms of policy making, which is why when people say, okay, there's a huge expectation from the annual budget,
Right.
oh, but there's no big bang, that's happened because that's a good thing to my mind, because you're not suddenly disrupting what you did last year.
Right.
You are building on what you did the previous year.
Yes.
So you're building gradually, but you have a certain strategic direction that you're following.
An SIP
And
policy.
absolutely. And for businesses, that's the biggest source of comfort.
Yes.
Because as a business, I'm making 5, 10, 20, 30-year plans.
Right.
So if you keep changing your policies or the incentives, then my whole economics, my whole fundamentals of the business goes for a toss. So I think stability is something vitally important, and I'm very happy that this government actually is focused, and it's a pronunciation that's come from the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister themselves, saying that there is going to be stability, we will not keep changing our policy. So that's a huge reassurance for us.
In fact, Mr. Khar, this is exactly what we're going to be talking about in WITT. We can't really wait to hear what our speakers have to say. You must tell us about the thought behind this WITT, the summit that we've planned, the global summit, and the reason for it to be timed now, so close to the elections. It's literally at an inflection point in this government's tenure.
Well, purely from an investor's perspective globally and in India also, when they do this risk management, it's called, the first and the foremost factor is not return on investment, is basic guarantee, if I can borrow that phrase, on the investment that they made.
Right.
We have had some really bad decisions. Vodafone, retrospective tax, some of the companies earlier, even after the reforms in 91, Geopolitics had to move out because a counter guarantee was promised to them. Then we thought that counter guarantee is too much a pressure on the fiscal balance sheet of the country. So then it was withdrawn. So Geopolitics left India. So in that sense, continuity is very, very important. The good thing here to note is, Sandeep, that post-liberalization 1991, all political parties are committed to the India growth story. The roadmap could be different. For instance, the Congress and the opposition roadmap is what I call entitlement, which is guarantee.
Right.
This government's role model is empowerment, which is you stand on your own feet. It may take you 10 years to do it, but once you're standing, you can throw a punch around. So that's how India will, so that is the broad context for the summit. The summit is that India has reached here. We are not blind to the challenges that we face today.
Right.
When she and I constructed the edifice for this particular summit, the idea was to showcase all the pluses and build them in with the inherent challenges that we have. There is a learning from the trajectory that we have had so far. He's right in articulating the decadal momentum, resting on those 4 I's, 1D, one more D that you added, and many more. Right. The collective will of 140 crore people to fly. There is a dream every Indian has. There is a resilience every Indian has. That is independent of any political establishment. So this summit actually captures that sentiment, and which is represented by the political and the popular mandate. That is why the summit keynote by the Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Absolutely.
And we're all looking forward to that. Shri, a lot of sessions will be about what India needs to build on and where India is as far as India's macros is concerned. You have the startup panel, you also have a panel on AI, perhaps everything to look out for as far as future possibilities of India's growth story is also concerned. Tell us a little bit more about the thinking that went behind when you were deciding on these panels. What was the thought process like?
Well, so obviously, Shweta, there was a big team that worked on it, starting with our MD, Rakesh, me, other editors, a lot of other colleagues who went and put their heads around to what should it look like, because this is only the second time that we're doing the What India Thinks Today summit, and we wanted to be bigger, better, bolder, with new innovative themes, with global speakers, give it a large global flavor. So, but there is going to be some fun, let me assure you. On day one, it's going to be all about fun. We have a lot of global celebrities, local celebrities coming, sports people coming. So we'll be looking at how does India become better at leveraging its, let's say, soft power, so to say. And day two is going to be about geopolitics, geoeconomy. You mentioned some of the themes, startups. They'll be on geopolitics, AI, which
India
is the hottest
soft
new
power.
thing. Absolutely, that's on day 1. And day 3 is the TV9 Bharatvarsh Satta Sammelan with an eye on the Lok Sabha 2024 election. So I think we have a really power-packed 3 days. Who's going to be here? The Prime Minister has very kindly consented to deliver the keynote. So we'll have him there as well, giving the vision for Viksit Bharat. So Rakesh, it's going to be.
I mean, there is an assembly of top global thought leaders. So what we have done is global minds, betting on India, Indian policy leaders across political spectrums, and domain experts. So, for instance, AI. We have a panel where there are people who are working on AI and driving their agendas in top companies from Reliance to Samsung to Microsoft. So, this is the deep dive that we are aiming for when it comes to core economic drivers. And in the geopolitical arena, again borrowing a phrase from the Prime Minister, we have coined one of the sessions, Not an Era of War, where we are looking at how the world is looking at India in terms of, constructing a new narrative, not just for India, a narrative which borders on mutual growth, inclusive growth, not just for India, but for the 8 billion people living on this planet.
All right, that is beautifully summed up. I believe it is
Absolutely.
going to be a power-packed 3 days from
3 days
News9's
action
table.
packed. And the
action
3
packed.
Bs, Shweta.
And
I'm
the
excited
3
about
Bs,
it.
of
The
course.
3 Bs, the bigger, bolder and better. India is poised for the next big leap. That's of course the session of our, that's the theme of our session for the Global Summit. So stay tuned as we continue the countdown to our 2-day Global Summit. I'd like to thank Mr. Rakesh Kar, Sridhar Ramakrishnan and Shweta for joining us this evening. Thanks for watching.